Today on Gritty, I am joined by my good friend Ryan Lampers, aka Sthealthy Hunter, and owner, host, and co-host of the Hunt Harvest Health podcast. Ryan is a modest, quiet guy who kills mature old animals on public land hunts across the West. Today on Gritty, Ryan shares some of his tactics for elk hunting. I feel like Ryan is a treasure box of useful information, just waiting to be opened. Today on Gritty, we pluck a few gold nuggets out of his treasure box, and the information is worth its weight in gold. You shot a Roosevelt, the sort of Roosevelt I would dream of. And so Phelps was telling me you like to use a really big branch.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. So
similar to in how you would set up to make a call, like you get on a knob, you get up on a ridge where you can really throw some tones out there and get a response. I do the same thing with breaking branches. You know, you get into these certain spots where you know that sound's going to carry. And a lot of times that's all it takes. When there's another bull that they expect to run into, first they do the back and forth with the calling or the break, busting up the tree and the thrashing. And if that's not enough to intimidate the other bull to go the other way, what's the next step? It's come in and show this guy how big my antlers are. And so they give you that nice side view. And, that's where picking a fight really comes in handy to get that side shot, get a double lung or a heart shot.
All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Bowman podcast. I'm on a phone call with my buddy Ryan Lampers from Hunt Harvest Health and Sthealthy Hunter on Instagram. And I've been listening to a lot of the Hunt Harvest Health podcasts recently, and I was able to follow some of your hunts during the fall, and I really, really enjoyed your recent podcast, or at least recent to me, one I recently listened to of your elk hunts. So I wanted to talk about those because I think they're really cool stories, and I learned a lot from them. So I wanted to share, I want my audience to go check out your show, but I wanted you to come on here and I want to talk to you about those hunts and introduce my audience to some new ideas. I think, at least for me, they were. And so with that, I want to hear about your Roosevelt elk hunt. And it was in Washington, right?
It was, yeah.
On the coast
of Washington here.
Coast of Washington.
Side. Yep.
And you shot a Roosevelt, the sort of Roosevelt I would dream of. And so you seem to do that on every hunt, though. And so
this was an exceptional bull, yeah, for sure.
So and you kind of shared how you got the bull. So walk us through it. Tell us about your season. Tell us about this Washington hunt that you went on. Kind of how it started, how you ended up where you were at, and the trials that you went through, and tell the story.
It started off where the weather had already turned sour. It was raining as usual. We're really accustomed to, you just kind of expect the worst if you're hunting the coast of Washington in September or October or November. It's usually pretty bad. So the last few years it's just been either raining or sleeting or snowing. Which, it didn't seem like a few years ago, it was like always hot and sunny and you're worried about the heat, but now the last few years it's been pretty miserable. So this year kind of started off in the high country, ended up in some of my old haunts up top, and man, it was great. My first day had some rain, but the woods were quiet, but I got on it wasn't the first day, but in the beginning of the hunt, then the first few days, I got on a really good bull. And man, I thought I was at that point of no return, like this bull was coming in. I had him at 15 yards. I was right below him. Everything was perfect. And, it's like we all get same thing every year, same old story. The wind, you feel it, it hits you, everything blows up, and you were so close. And nothing happened, and you're standing there just, imagining what could have been. And so that's kind of what happened to me on my first real good exchange with a big bull. Well, fast forward about 45 minutes after that, and that big weather system came in. And I mean, it was gnarly. I tried to get a little video, kind of cruising the top of that ridge, and it was so bad. I mean, rain geared up, just started pouring. And windy. I didn't get any good video. I couldn't hear myself talking, and I was talking into my phone. But so I ended up having to kind of set up and move down the mountain quite a ways into a spot that I had learned and researched prior, done some scouting, and actually had found a bull a couple years ago. But on my way into this area, I pitching bugles, going in the dark, and I never got any responses. And this was kind of mid-September. And so I had to go back down basically to get out of the snow and rain and all that. Got back down in there, and shoot, it was quiet. It was.
And Ryan, how much of an elevation change are you talking about?
Oh, I think it was about 3,000 feet dropping down from where I was.
Okay,
so it was a pretty good clip getting down the mountain.
What was the terrain like up high on the mountain?
Up top, it's more of a alpine setting. Anywhere from you put yourself in the right spot, you're actually in,
above timberline.
Yeah, yep, and kind of that upper bear country. You're seeing, not timberline. We're only at about 5,000-6,000 feet.
Okay,
but that is as high as you can possibly get.
Okay.
But the terrain goes from open, real elky looking habitat to really dark timber, cedars, and down into the bottoms you get down to where there's a lot more cedars and a lot more swamp. I mean, it's skunk cabbage and the whole 9 yards. Okay. So it's just classic Western.
So that weather pretty much chased you off the top there, and you went down, went low, dropped another 3,000 feet. That's a big drop. And when you get down there lower, what did you expect to find down there, and why didn't you start down there?
Well, yeah, good question. Why I didn't start down there. Well, one of the reasons was going in, I had an area picked out up there where I had that encounter with that bull, and there's been a bull that's eluded me for a while. He's a real good one, and that bull that I had that encounter with was not the bull, but it was a good bull in this spot. So, coming into the season, everything kind of pushed me to that upper elevation where I could probably target that monster that was living up there.
So how do you know that deer, that elk is up there?
Because I had hunted it prior. The year before I had hunted it and had an encounter. Just an old growly, didn't have any tones left in his bugle. He'd lost those tones just from age. And so I knew he was an old bull, and I was hoping to find him there again this year. I did not have time to go up and scout that particular spot. But from my encounters the previous year, last year, I had to go back in there. You can't leave a bull like that and not go back and just hope for another encounter.
He's still there. So what do you think, by the way, about elk? You saw him there last season. What makes you think he'll be there still? Like, what do you know about elk?
Well, it was his home zone. It was an area that he goes into rut year after year. You can tell by his scrapes. You get into his bedroom there, and you can see a progression of year after year after year. He's got these areas tore up. There's wallows, scrapes, and that's his spot. And, this year was no different. I don't know if that particular bull, last year I heard him, he's just a growly old sucker. This year I never did hear that bull, but I heard this other one, and that's the one I went for. And he had kind of, I think, taken over his little bedroom there, and he had it all scraped up.
That's kind of one thing that I've learned hunting when I hunted Eastern Oregon in some of the backpack places where we would go in deep. There were certain areas where the elk would just rut every year in this spot, in this little canyon spot, and they just would tear it up. And we would spook them out. They'd leave, and they'd come back in the middle of the night and be back there the next day.
That's it. You're exactly right. There are core areas that are always going to have bulls move into, I think, in my opinion, because I can go back to a spot year after year. I could kill a good bull in one spot and expect to find another good bull move into that spot the following year. It just kind of works like that. Yeah, I mean, it's the cows that bring all the boys to the yard, right? So there's definitely a spot that, like this particular area, something is right about that area. The feed zone is in the right spot. The wallows, the water is in the correct spot. It's a spot that will continue to have elk year after year after year. And, you're probably right. It may be one old cow, several cows that have been there forever. It's just got that spot. And I've hunted a lot of places, even in the north woods of Idaho, where, same thing. I've noticed the same thing. There's places that I can go back to now, and I just know there's going to be elk there. If the elk are rutting, they're going to be in there. Even in this, wolf era that we're in right now, with wolves all around, they typically will find their way back to, there's certain bowls back there that I just know they're going to be in where, I don't know. They just always seem to come back there. That's where the cows are. That's where they're going to go back to rut year after year after year, like clockwork. They're typically going to be found there. So, yeah, now this place that I had found here in Washington, several years ago, I was in there, and it was probably about 200 yards, if that, maybe 150 yards from where this whole encounter happened this year. And I had another encounter with a great bull in that same exact spot. And I had that bull committed and coming in, and shoot, I took one step at the wrong time, just as I was getting ready to pull my bow, and I kicked there was a dead branch, big old cedar branch that had fallen, and I just kind of moved it a little bit. Well, there was a bee's nest in that branch, and so the bees came up, and I will walk on water to get away from bees because I'm allergic. So even with that big old bull, I could see his antlers. He's just right in front of me, and I was in the process of pulling my bow back when bees were in my face, and yeah, man, I had to drop the bow and run the other way. It was pretty pathetic, but I didn't get stung, so I lived.
Okay, so you're in this area, so you go. That's why you go back, but then you drop 3,000 feet in elevation. And what did you expect to happen down there, and and you dropped to get out of the storm? Yeah, I think you said on the podcast you did it was going to be pretty tough to kill anything in that storm.
Yeah, it was just, I couldn't hear anything. If you can't hear anything when you're archery hunting in that type area, I mean, your chance of success is tiny. Is it because it's so thick? It's thick. It's not an area where you're going to spot and stalk. Very little glass, and there's a couple places that you could probably glass, but the bulls are in the timber. You'd just be basically walking around blind, and so I did not want to do that. My time's always limited, and so I dropped down with the expectation of finding an area a little more out of the weather in a place that I could, get some interaction with a bull and try to get one to call back.
Right.
That was my hope. Now, that's not what happened. I did get down in there, and it was quieter. It wasn't the weather, but the rain was relentless, and the bulls were not calling down in there either. There were elk around. I was seeing plenty of sign. I was seeing fresh scrapes, but the bulls were just not talking, and so that was kind of frustrating. But I knew they were there, so.
And how do you know that they're there? Because that seems to be a common thread among Roosevelt hunters. I hear a lot of guys go out and they hit the woods and they hunt for 5 days and they don't see a single elk, and they're like, "There's just no elk there." But
yeah, I mean, it's pretty common sense type stuff. You're seeing fresh tracks in the mud. When it's raining, it's washing everything out. You're seeing, muddy spots in the trail. You're seeing fresh sign. Elk poop's kind of hard to distinguish from really fresh to really old when it's wet like that. But you're seeing green, and you're seeing fresh scrapes, like green scrapes.
Okay.
So they're in there at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can tell from the sign that there's some elk in there, but they're not talking.
They're not talking. Not talking at all.
Okay.
It was frustrating. I was going days without hearing anything, and I knew they were there. And it's pretty thick down in this lower kind of a marshy area, steep-sided canyon. It's got, a lot of cedars in the bottom, cedars growing up the sides, creeks coming in, just classic coastal type stuff. You're from Oregon,
Yeah.
you know what it's like hunting these rosies, and it can be thick and it's typically wet. Now in this country, luckily I had some intuition that I knew I might end up in that part of on that part of the mountain, because I did pack some waders, just some hip boots.
Yeah, you mentioned
just
those.
a pair of light Gore-Tex waders that you throw in your pack, you don't even know they're there, which is a great thing to have if you're going across.
And these are hip waders?
Cruising hip waders. Yeah, they just go up, so far and keep you dry if you got to cross a creek. And sometimes those creeks, when it really gets to rain, and if you got 4 or 5 days straight rain, they get pretty swollen. And, you always think you can find a spot to cross a creek. Sometimes it's not that easy, especially when it's that thick.
I could have used those in Prince of Wales Island.
Yeah, for sure, man. They're great.
What are they called?
I think Chota makes them. That's the name on them. They're just a perfect lightweight little boot. Okay. And then I've just got a pair of neoprene booties that I put on over the top of the actual neoprene socks that are on there on the boot. And that's all I need. Okay. And that'll get me through creeks. That'll get me through mud holes with skunk cabbage and all that. And I don't have to worry about slopping around in wet boots all day. So it's a real big benefit to have. And honestly, I spent a couple days just wearing those around in the marshes and traipsing around so I could cover country and cross creeks. So big benefit to have in that part of the country for sure.
Okay.
So, but yeah, knowing that they were there, I just knew I had to stick with it, and just kind of keep my scent out of the areas where I figured the elk were, even though they weren't calling and I wasn't getting any response from them. I did try to just stay on the edges of, where I thought, I might run into them, blow them out, spook them out, yada, yada. So it was kind of frustrating just kind of staying around on the edges and not getting anything to talk. But it did work. One of the mornings I ended up going out, as always, making calls in the night, middle of the night, and still not getting any response, just pouring rain. So I went down to a spot where I had seen some cows, and it was a pretty good group of cows, and I figured there's got to be a bull with those cows. And it was kind of a more open part of the marsh, so I kind of got in there that morning, and same thing, making a few calls, nothing's responding. Went to some cow calls, nothing's responding. And so immediately what I start doing is just breaking brush. I break a lot of brush, especially when they're not talking at all. So, picking up a big stick and cracking branches, stepping on stuff, and just, raking the snot out of timber, dead wood. And that has worked for me in the past. It worked for me really, really well. At those times where I'm not getting a good response or bulls hung up.
So you're trying to call, but it's just not working. And there's elk in there. You said, you try to stay out of the area where the elk are. Yep. Kind of like, I guess, bedding and really spend a lot of their time. How do you know where that spot is? Because I could see a hunter just blundering right through the middle of it and then bumping them. If they're not talking, like, how do you know? Is it just because you're familiar with the area? It's been there a while?
That's it. It's just simply because I know it. I know the spot. I know where they hang out. I know where they come off the hill to feed at night and then go back.
So you've done your scouting and you know the area.
Yeah.
So you're
for sure.
But you're disciplined enough not to just walk into their spots. So
if I hadn't known the area, if I hadn't been in there before and observed their habits, I probably would have made the same mistake any new hunter coming into that spot would make, and that I probably would go right through the middle of it and just, blowing calls and pushing through and probably blowing them out if the wind wasn't right. It's just like every elk hunter will tell you, the wind is your biggest nemesis in the elk woods. And as soon as you think, there's a steady wind coming down, it turns and hits you in the back. And it's pretty frustrating.
I'll say this, that I've done some hunts where in areas where the wind seems to stay consistent all day long, in a certain, on a certain hunt. and you can just rely on it. And it's a game changer. It's incredible how much easier it is. And then when you hunt these areas where the wind just sort of shifts constantly and changes all day long, dude, there's very few hunts that are more frustrating than that.
Oh, it just makes you feel like you can't do anything. It makes you feel like you're just a bumbling fool out there walking through the woods and hoping you get it right.
I think it gets to a point where you're just like, you just start ignoring the wind issues because there's not much you can do about it. And so you just, and then you're just hoping it holds long enough when that moment of truth comes that you can get close enough and make a shot. And sometimes I'm like, there's no way that thing didn't smell me. And yet I got the shot and I killed it, So sometimes when it gets like that, it just almost gets to the point where it's like, whatever.
Yeah, and that's the thing about elk hunting. That's why I love mule deer hunting, Brian, because mule deer hunting, you're hunting in the summer or, the late part of the summer. Winds can be a lot more consistent. You can figure out winds in those mule deer mountains.
Well, the thermals are more predictable and.
Oh yeah. Thermals are easy to figure out what they're going to do. Elk woods, just frustrating sometimes. But the fortunate thing about elk is you can be aggressive. You can blow them out, and you still got an opportunity to get them.
Well, and I've never heard of just kind of chucking the call and just going straight to breaking branches and raking only. But I've heard a few guys talk about it this year on that moose hunt I was on in BC. A bunch of guys were telling me all they ever do is rake. They don't even call to the moose. Never even dawned on me, really. And so here you are, you're breaking branches and raking, but you're not making any elk sounds.
And I can't even tell you how many bulls I've called in with just breaking branches, especially early season, when it is quiet out there. And that has worked for me time and time again. And, this wasn't early season, but they weren't talking, so they weren't fired up. It was an area where I don't think there was a lot of bulls. There wasn't a lot of competition. There was a good bull and probably a couple others. But that has seemed to work really well. Now, similar to in how you would set up to make a call, like you get on a knob, you get up on a ridge where you can really throw some tones out there and get a response. I do the same thing with breaking branches. You get into these certain spots where that sound's going to carry. And a lot of times that's all it takes to either get that bull to, pop off to you or get him to come. And you get to hear him start coming in, just walking in and popping branches himself. That's kind of how I play it. It's worked for me. It's been amazing in Idaho, breaking branches off of ridges and into basins without a call even being called. I haven't made any vocal sounds at all, and I've called in bulls. I called in a bull for my dad one time, his first archery bull ever, and that was completely just breaking branches. And it was pretty cool how it worked out. It was just a bull that he'd been played with enough times. He knew the drill. He knew what was going on, and that's what it took. Just going at him in a different way, making elk sounds, doing what other elk do, and that's at that time of year, just busting up trees. So
interesting. And so Phelps was telling me you like to use a really big branch.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. So you pick up, you find what's really big? Because I'm a big guy, I could pick up like a tree, but
yeah, 4-inch diameter type stuff, just bigger, And that probably came from, when you grab that little piece of wood in the woods and you're all set up, you're ready to go, you got an elk just out of range and you want to break something and you go to break it and your stick breaks.
Yeah.
And you're like, dang it. And then you can't looking around, you can't find one better. I started using a lot bigger, raking stick a lot of years ago. And I was taught that from some old timer that I learned elk hunting from a long time ago. This guy always carried around a giant hunk of wood. I mean, he's not shaving weight. He's carrying a pretty big stick of wood, and he's using that to rake. And what he told me back then, this was 20 plus years ago, was it sounds better. So he proved that to me by, he'd go out, 50 yards and he'd start raking a tree. And you can tell there's a little bit of a distinct difference between when you're raking with some spindly little piece of, wood. There's something not quite it does not sound like a true elk when we've all been around a bull that's just raking the snot out of a tree.
Right.
When they come crashing into that tree and they're smashing into it with that antler, especially a herd bull, it sounds distinct. You can just kind of tell that's a big bull. That's not a spike. It's not a raghorn. It's got a sound to it.
Yep.
And so that was the reasoning why he did it, and that's kind of what I've done, taking over from that. Is from that experience, he walked out 50, 60 yards and started raking, and it sounded like a real bull and a really big bull, versus taking a little 1 inch, 2 inch branch and trying to scrape a tree. It just doesn't sound quite right. So, yeah, 3-4 inch diameter stick that's not going to break on you.
So you start working the sounds. What happens? How long?
Oh, a long time. That's where I think some folks might not do it long enough. I think people kind of break a few and then listen. Well, bulls, if you ever hear them rake, usually they go for a while. I mean, minutes sometimes. So, I'll sit there and rake and smash and break stuff for several minutes in one setting and then stop and listen. But that's kind of what they do. So that's kind of what I tried to do the same.
It almost seems like silent calling in a way, which I've done for a long time, but I'll mix a lot of raking and branch breaking and all that kind of stuff, but I'll throw in some cow calls every here and there. But I've never abandoned the calls altogether and done it that I can remember.
Well, I tell you what, it'll, when you're just breaking branches and you can work a bull in with breaking sticks, covers up your bad calling. If you're a bad caller, or semi okay at it, and you're worried about, making the wrong sound or screwing it up, you really have a hard time going out there breaking branches, because that's exactly what they're doing. And, you can't really make a bad sound with.
So when you've done this,
trees.
Do they bugle at you eventually, or do they generally sort of stay quiet as well? How does it work?
Oh, I've had both experiences.
Okay.
Sometimes that's what gets them out of their bed, and that's what gets them fired up. They know another bull's challenging them. It's getting close, and sometimes they just come in and they start doing the same thing, and you go back and forth. I worked a bull last year in Idaho. That big old bull, the one I got, and that was a rake fest. I mean, we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it was pretty fun. I was running out of sticks to break by the time I ended up getting that bull, but we just went back and forth. It was like we were trying to see who was going to outlast the other one and who could, make those sounds, those most intimidating sounds, over the other one. And so it was a blast. And I think that went for about 40 minutes, and before he decided to come in. And so it does work, and it worked really well on that experience.
Okay, so
that was early season. That wasn't even when they were rutting yet. That was well before rut.
So you'll work that sound for a few minutes straight, for 4 minutes or whatever, 5, and then you'll stop and you'll wait and listen for a while. And how long do you leave between sets?
I'm probably not the most patient when it comes to elk like that. I think if you're a moose hunting, you probably want to wait a lot longer if you're making those calls, from what I hear. But now with elk, I'll wait a few minutes, and if I don't hear any sticks breaking or them, busting anything up, or hear a call back from that, I'll move on and go hit a new spot, go another 100 yards, and do the same thing. And it's worked.
Okay, so you're kind of walking around and you're just breaking stuff and making sounds. And then you'll wait a while, and if you don't hear anything, you move pretty quickly then. So you're not sitting in a spot for 45 minutes to an hour just scraping?
No. I don't have the patience for that. Maybe I'd kill bigger stuff if I did, but no, I can't do that. I just can't. Always on the move, always, trying to, be aggressive and go to them. That's just work for me. Okay. I'm not going to say that it wouldn't work to sit down and, do a sequence every 10 minutes or so, but that probably works for some guys. I just don't have the patience for it. It's break a bunch of brush, wait a few minutes. If I don't hear anything, move on, another 100 yards, do it again. And it just flat works. Okay. It's worked for me and works for a lot of guys. I think I'm definitely not the only guy doing that. It's worked for a lot of folks.
When you do this, and you decide to set up like where you set up for this bull, what made you set up in that spot? Like, what are you looking for?
So what happened this year on that coastal bull was I saw the cows. So I was kind of cruising through this swamp, cruising. I was going pretty slow, but it was in the exact spot where I'd seen cows prior to that, and I kind of had a feeling that's where they were going to be. And I just happened to spot them up ahead of me. There's 7-8 cows there. So what I did is I stopped, kind of got in a spot where I could bust up some trees, started raking, started crushing that tree right next to a big old giant cedar. And I started popping sticks, assuming, we're mid to just, I don't know, it was like the 20th of September maybe. And, those cows should have that herd bull with them. There's 7-8 cows there. They're not going to be by themselves.
Right.
And so assuming that's why I set up, arrow knocked, everything ready to go. And then, started crushing that tree and just smacking the crud out of it and breaking everything, kicking everything I could. And it did not take long. And that bull started doing the same thing. He just started crushing and thrashing a tree. And he was probably only like 80 yards out. I don't know. He wasn't that far. And I heard him just, tearing something up. And then I could hear him coming in at that point. I didn't have to make any calls. He was coming, and he thrashed a tree and basically just took a beeline right for me. And my job was over. He was coming in no matter what at that point. So, when you're by yourself and you're doing it solo, there's always kind of like you got the bow held in one hand, you got the stick held in the other hand, and when do I drop the stick and grab my release and all that? I mean, you got your release set up on your bow already, but it's kind of like a wishy-washy thing where I don't know when to drop the stick. Am I going to have to smack this tree again? But that bull was coming in, and he quickly closed the distance. And I saw him kind of head back, rolling through the tree straight at me. And he got really nice and close. I mean, he got in, came right behind a cedar tree, allowed me to pull back and get a 17-yard shot on him. And I've said before, the thing about when you pick a fight with a bull with either a bugle or with breaking brush, that bull is assuming he's coming in to fight, right? He's not coming in looking for cows. So he's not coming in head first, straight on, and standing there looking right at you. That allows you to get a frontal shot if that's what you're comfortable doing. But I've always preferred picking that fight and getting that bull to come in and show himself sideways, which is what they always do. When there's another bull that they expect to run into, first they do the back and forth with the calling or the break, busting up the tree and the thrashing. And if that's not enough to intimidate the other bull to go the other way, what's the next step? It's come in and show this guy how big my antlers are. And so they give you that nice side view. And, that's where picking a fight really comes in handy to get that side shot, get a double lung or a heart shot. And that's exactly what this bull did. He came in expecting there to be a bull there. Just because of the fact that I was busting up that tree, and he gave me a great shot, nice side shot, and he didn't go very far. So
yeah. Well, so when they're coming in like that, are you like hiding behind something? You in front of a bush, or you?
I was right in front of it. Yeah, I had a big old kind of cluster of cedars on my left, and kind of a couple small, almost jack pine type things in front of me. But I was in front of it, so I didn't have anything obstructing a shot. And it's interesting when bulls get to that point where they're coming in and they're not good. I mean, there's just like it almost seems like their eyes roll back in their head.
Yeah,
they're coming and they're coming fast. And when they get into that point and they're looking to fight, I think you could ditch the camo and just probably be in a red checkered, flannel shirt,
flashing
and probably
light.
still get. Yeah, you could probably be in hunter orange and still get a shot. They're almost blinded by their rage at that point when they kind of figure out, all right, I have to go fight this bull.
Yeah,
and they're pissed and they're snotting all over themselves. And yeah, it's a big rush for sure. I love it.
Yeah, I'm very curious because, sometimes that happens, but sometimes they herd up their cows and leave. And
Yeah.
so what's the magic sauce? Like, how do you get them to come in rather than leave?
Well, I think in that circumstance right there, I was close. I was within eyesight of those cows. I could see those cows, and they were not that far ahead of me. They were, within 100 yards, maybe 80, 90 yards. And so, but it was pretty heavily timbered, and, there were some alders and cedars, and, I couldn't see everything, so I assumed that bull was there.
Yeah.
So that was a great time to, thrash that tree. Now, I could have pitched a big old bugle out at that point and probably had the same result. I don't know, maybe. But how that week had gone and how the prior few days had gone without them talking, I didn't want to make that call. I just wanted it to be natural. They're not going to have any fear of me breaking brush.
Right.
And that's what worked. So
yeah, I bet they're probably just called in less that way than they are by calls. I'm surprised when I'm out in the woods and another hunter's out there and he's calling, how often there are no elk sounds accompanying the calls.
Yeah.
And so there's no branches breaking, there's no raking, there's none of this other stuff that typically follows the vocalizations that you hear. And I think that's a major mistake. I've never tried the reverse, though. I always try to make sure I have lots of elk sounds accompanying all my vocalizations. But I've never tried just relying on breaking branches and scraping and on its own. Like, I have done that, especially in the beginning, to get an elk kind of fired up. Just broke. I remember being in eel caps, and we're just like raking trees until the bull bugled. And as soon as he bugled first, then I bugled back. I suppose if he had never bugled, I'd have just kept, trying not to make the sounds. But I can imagine that, like I said, there's a lot of times where they're maybe more call shy because they're called to a lot. They figured that out. And I could see where abandoning the vocalizations and just going the other route would be a lot more convincing in certain areas.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think where a lot of folks run into trouble is closing that last little bit of distance. And sometimes what happens is they just stop making elk sounds. There's going to be a point in that little conversation you're having with him where he kind of holds up and he sticks out there and he wants to see what's making those calls or what's, doing this. And I think a lot of people freeze up at that point and maybe don't have a stick in their hand that they can kind of pop or step on or anything like that. That just completely relaxes them. And it's usually at the point where you start not making cow sounds or not making any type of elk sounds that you hit that stalemate. And all of a sudden it's like he's standing there, and then he loses interest, and then he goes the other way, and then it's trouble. I
get accused of over calling or over, but it works for me. And I just make a lot of noise. I mean, I'll be breaking branches constantly, and back to like taking a break. I don't last like a minute or two, and I'm back to raking or calling or usually, but I'm always kind of breaking branches, because if you've hung out next to an elk herd, even if it's only 8 cows, a small group, dude, they're just making a ton of noise.
Oh yeah, they're so noisy all the time.
And I'm like, well, I think you're right about it. Makes them so relaxed when they keep hearing all those sounds. When I see them kind of freak out, it's when they hear all these cows making vocalizations, but not a single branch is being broke, or no hoofs are beating on the ground. Nothing's happening, and they're like, this is just eerie. I think their sixth senses turn on. So I found it really relaxes them too.
Yeah, one of the experiences I had in my early years, which kind of taught me that, was, again, going back to that old timer that I learned a lot from way back in the day. He always had a couple sticks in his pocket, and so he would solo hunt as well. And so what he taught me to do is he'd just slip a couple of nice dry sticks in his pocket. And so when that bull gets in tight, he may be 30 yards, but in North Idaho, that may not be close enough. You still might not get that shot because of all the thickness. And so he would, if he could see them and they're just kind of held up out there, he'd just kind of reach down and snap that stick, snap it again, snap another one. And sometimes that's all it took. And that worked on a bull for me one time. I was using all the tricks that he had taught me. and Northwoods, Idaho again, and same thing. And I had sticks in my pocket, and man, sometimes that is what it takes. It just calms them down. They're not so on alert, and they'll take those next 5-6 steps in where you get that shot. But yeah, it definitely works, and that's always stuck with me. And that's one instance where I know for a fact that it worked, and that's what got that bull those extra few steps that got me that shot.
Yeah. So then fast forward, you go to, well, first tell me about this bull. You shoot him. He doesn't go more than 100 yards on a death
run. A little
run.
over 100 yards. Yeah. 125 yards is all slapped right down into a big mud pie.
And he has the most beautiful, like orangey red, dark antlers.
Yeah, man.
It's just
these coastal
bull.
Rosies have some of the prettiest horns you'll ever see, just by what they're scraping on.
I mean, it's
they're
just
scraping
unreal.
On cedars. Yeah, they're scraping on alders, and that red, pitch that's in there, that just puts the prettiest coat shine to those antlers.
I've shot
there's something about a nice dark bull, but
Mhm.
there's something about that red, especially when they're big and mature like that, that red orangey color.
Yeah, I shot some blacktail bucks like that.
Yeah.
And one thing I wondered, because over the years the red faded, and how do you get that to stay?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know.
They're still red, but not like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I know some people put that,
Like a
varnish on there and all that. I just can't do that to the horn. It looks a little phony to me.
Too commercial. Well,
I don't know. I don't know how you maintain that.
It's a really beautiful bull. I mean, and big. Like, he looks like a Rocky Mountain elk in terms of the antler size. Because typically when I think Roosevelt, I think giant body, like a horse. Just huge, tall, dark black, legs and stuff and all of that. But what I don't picture very often, I picture a set of antlers that are kind of like a satellite bull, like a Rocky Mountain
usually
satellite.
More stumpy, a little more narrow, maybe crowned out up top.
Yeah.
Sometimes on the older bulls. Yeah,
they're reaching 270.
And this bull had a ton of mass to him. He was really heavy. His sixes laid out real perfect, like a Rocky. But then he was developing like Rosies do, that little bit of a crown. He was getting kind of stickers on that up there around the fourth. And so had a little kicker on his left side and just a little sticker on his right coming, that little devil horn between the fourth and fifth. And so, yeah, I mean,
how old
just
do you
a
think
beautiful
this bull was?
He's pretty old. I don't know exactly, but he was up there. He's probably, I don't know if he's a 9.5, 10.5-year-old bull, but he's definitely an old warrior for sure. And he had a pretty good body on him. I mean, all these Rosies do. I got over 300 pounds of meat off him. Scraped him and got that. So that's in your typical Rosie fashion. You get a lot of meat off these things, which is great.
Well, cool, Ryan. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Folks, go check out Sthealthy Hunter on Instagram. Give him a follow and check out Hunt Harvest Health Podcast. And stay gritty, man.
Stay gritty. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Despite our ever-changing, ever-indignant world with its growing ignorance of and indifference to the ways of the wild, I remain a predator, pitying those who revel in artificiality and synthetic success while regarding me and my kind as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood. I stalk a real world of dark wood and tall grass stirred by a restless wind blowing across sunlit water and beneath star-strewn sky. And on those occasions when I choose to kill, to claim some small part of nature's bounty for my own, I do so by choice, quickly, with the learned efficiency of a skilled hunter. Further, in my heart and mind, I know the truth and make no apologies for my actions or my place and time. Others around me may opt to eat only plants, nuts, and fruits. Still others may employ faceless strangers to procure their meats, their leather, their feathers, and all those niceties and necessities of life. Such is their right, of course, and I wish them well. All I ask in return is no one begrudge me, and all of us who may answer the primordial stirrings within our hunter souls, my right to do some of these things myself. What you just heard is a quote from M.R. James. We truly live in a world that is largely ignorant and indifferent to the ways of the wild. And although some regard us as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood, we have the opportunity to change the way these people view the hunter and the hunt. We can share our experiences and nature's bounty with those who employ these faceless strangers. And by so doing, we make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the wild animals in the wild places we care so deeply about. Never stop sharing your passion for hunting and the outdoors. Our wild animals and our wild places depend on it.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to the Gritty Bowman.
Gritty Bowman.